Scared the dog. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Overcoming Average. Today, we have Dalton Stephenson, a man of many talents, with us. So thanks for coming on, man.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So we were just talking. I want to just jump right into some of the things that you're into. so you're not an average guy, I would say. And some of the things that you've gotten into are they're just interesting, and I love how you take it and run with it. So the thing you just recently showed me is your new fascination, or maybe not so new fascination, with whips.
Yeah. Yes.
And I love the answer. I said, why whips of all things? Not that there's anything wrong with a whip, but I asked why whips, and you said Indiana Jones, man. So
Yes. No, I used to be one of my favorite movies when I was growing up. I actually had like a cheap little Indiana Jones whip that I got from Disney back when I was probably in 7th grade. So I guess I was, 12? And I don't know. I came across some guy on YouTube, Adam Winrich on YouTube, who does like some really elaborate whip routines, and started thinking about it. And next thing I know, I bought a whip, and then I bought 2, and then I bought way more than 2. And bought matching pairs, started learning different little routines to do. It's actually a good little arm and chest workout as well. And that's what got me more or less into it, especially over quarantine, because when especially at the height of staying home, I just wanted to get out and do something different. And so we go to the parks. My wife got into poi, which is like a flow arts type thing. She started doing some of that while I was doing the whips, and yeah, it kind of became like a whole family thing to learn these little routines and all this stuff. You know, one day we had to just run off to the circus. Who knows?
That's awesome.
But no, but I got into it too for the artistry, because like the thing about whips that's really cool is what I was telling you, is the way they're made. A lot of them are made of kangaroo hide, and they're cut and they're braided. Like someone actually braids every design, everything on it. And it fascinates me. But the best maker I've found so far is a guy named Peter Jack out of New Zealand. He does a really good job on that. But that is, to me, just the idea of someone braiding this entire thing. And it's the first man-made instrument that's ever broken the sound barrier. And we still don't actually know exactly how it does it.
Really?
Yes.
That's crazy. Yeah. When you said that, I was skeptical. I was like, wow. But yeah, it was interesting to watch. You'll have to send me some of those videos, especially the one you and your coat on top of a building cracking whips. It's awesome. So, yeah, I think there's, we've talked about this before and other topics, but the digital age has kind of brought on a change. My brother and I were having this conversation this weekend at a family reunion. It's a change of art. Like, people now create art. I would say most of the art that's created is digital now. I mean, when you talk about video, with the new iPads and stuff, people can draw, they can paint, they can color, lighting design, cameras. I mean, it's insane. I think about even just when we were kids, there's probably 50 or 100 photos of me as a child. I have probably 50 pictures of my kids this month.
Mm-hmm.
So art's really changed. And I think that is cool, that somebody can take something like a whip and make art out of it. And, I don't know the utility in day to day. You said you can carry it around, right? You can carry it. Do you carry yours in Charlotte when you're working?
No. Yes, a client doesn't sign the paperwork, just start popping a whip up. No, like, so from a use perspective, what it was used for was, and it still is used for it in Australia and New Zealand, probably out in the West. It was used to herd cattle and herd sheep. Mm-hmm. They actually call them, in like the Australian style whips with the long handles are called stockman's whips, because that's what they call them. The people that do livestock, they call them stockmen. So it is an effective way, without like shooting a gun off and all that, to herd and to get things to move a certain direction. Most use now, though, I think, is performance based. I couldn't imagine, a lot of places where you just kind of herd traffic through 77. I don't know. Well, that'd be hilarious.
That would be good. Yeah.
That probably let a lot of my stress off sometimes on 77.
So I know some other things you're into. Watches. You're a watch connoisseur of sorts.
Of sorts.
So what got you into watches?
I don't actually have the answer to that.
Okay.
I have no idea. I think I bought a crappy watch one time that I liked, and started researching watches and realized it was a crappy. It was like when it's like, that first time you date someone, you realize they actually kind of suck. That happened to me. I think it was with one like those Movement type watches or one of those random little online brands. I don't remember if it was Movement or if it was Vincero or any of those, but then I started to dig in a little deeper and realize like there's a lot to watches, which is kind of my thing. I don't have, so as you said, I have varied interests, but it's wide, but it's not actually that wide. It's kind of narrow but deep. So like when I get into something, I really like the next thing you know, oh, this Movement is on this watch. Rolex makes their stuff in house. That's why this costs this much, and it just digs down. My wife knows when the train starts to roll. She's like, "Oh, here we go. The train's left the station. Like here, we're about to own 5 of whatever the heck this is."
Well, and I think that's the thing that's always fascinated me about you is that you put it really well is your depth. You like to dig into things like even just something like a watch. I think we had that conversation because you were sort of hating on my Apple Watch and that sort of thing.
Wasn't quite hating on it because I told you I had an Apple Watch. I used to have a Samsung Watch too.
Yeah.
Back in the day with my YouTube channel, that's actually my most viewed video still is I think comparing a Pebble when that was a thing to the Apple Watch to a Moto 360 and a Samsung Watch because they were all different.
Right. Yeah. But your depth, I mean, again, you were pretty early in the YouTube game. I've been cheering for you to get back into that as well. I think you'd be great in that world again. But yeah, your depth of knowledge in things. So I want to kind of go back to your upbringing and dig in a little bit and find out where did that come from? So take us back to the beginning. So where'd you come from and how did you get here?
Oh gosh, this is a boring story. I was born, I think Asheville. Yeah, I was born in Asheville. I've moved all over North Carolina as a kid. Only child, and my mom managed restaurants. So as they would open like J&S Cafeteria back when that was a thing, and then Cracker Barrel later, still there actually. So when we would move a lot when I was younger, and I think the only reason I really can think of to why I got into stuff so deep is because I just had a lot of time by myself. As a kid, like I lived in apartments a lot. Then we finally had a house where I was totally alone. Like I remember having the Sega channel, which is like Sega Genesis had this thing where like 50 games a month. It was a subscription service way before that was a thing.
I remember that. Yeah.
Do you? Okay, because like a lot of people don't even, like a lot of people
That was a long time ago.
Man, sometimes I have a Mandela effect moment on it because people look at me like, "What's that? That's not a thing." I'm like, "No, it totally is. It came through your cable."
Yeah, I remember that. I never had it. We were too poor to have that sort of stuff. But
we probably were too, to be honest. But that's, and then I don't know. I think that I've just been the kind of person I believe I had some ADHD, probably still do. And the H on that, the hyper focus side of it is just whenever I really get into something, I like really dig in. Like it's not a little bit. It's a lot, and it's not a lot of things because most things I'd look at, I'm like, boring. Yeah. Move on. So, right. But when I do finally find something that like grabs my interest, I just really like. I love to sink my teeth into it. I like learning. I love learning new stuff. Like I do it with work. I can't imagine like having a job that would be boring.
How were you as a student? Were you a good student?
Terrible.
That's what I guessed.
Terrible. No. So I actually graduated high school with a stellar GPA of 2.3, which for those keeping it score at home, that is like mostly D's with like a C. The 0.3 made it 1C. But I did happen to have, which was the funniest part, because I remember talking to college counselors and stuff back then, I had a 1420 SAT score. Which this is when 1600 was really high because I guess now there's a 2100. Which,
right, yeah.
So 1400 is not as like, but back then it was a really big deal.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to several colleges and they were like, "Oh, if you'll go to community college and get your associates, and if you can get a 3.5 or higher, like we can open some doors for you and make things happen," which ended up not working out either. But as I found out much later in life, unfortunately, is I was actually bored. I didn't figure it out probably till my senior year. Because I talked my way into a physics class because I wanted to be in physics, and physics was kind of an honors class. So while I'm barely passing Algebra 2, I'm making a B in physics, which was the math that you had to use in physics. You had to use a lot more trigonometry.
Yeah.
You had to use math that I hadn't even touched yet in algebra. And there's two things I figured out. One, I suck with conceptual stuff. Like if you put some numbers on a piece of paper and an arrow, okay. Give me a story with it. Ask me why a car is going to go off of a curve at 40 miles an hour, but not at 30. Got you. Like I can figure that out. The coefficient of friction and all that I can do. Just drawing an arrow pointing over a curve with an X and a Y. Nope.
Right.
Same problem, but I don't.
Which in mathematics is several steps deep. I know for me, you start with algebra, algebra 2, all the layers in between. Then you do pre-calc, calculus, calculus 2. So calculus 2 is when I remember thinking, oh, that's how they actually figure out the velocity of a race car and put it on the screen when you're watching NASCAR or something like that. That's when the practical actually, you can conceptualize it and say, oh, this actually works. And that's when you start to enter into physics and the trigonometry finally makes sense other than, again, arrows and stuff. So, and, again, not to insult, but I guess you weren't a good student because that's a common thread I see with smart people. School, and again, this is, there's some great students who have terrible work ethic later in life. They kind of get by and they're really good. And then I know for me, there were guys in college that would come in just drunk and they would pass the test. And I was studying all weekend and I would get a B or a C plus or something. I would barely scrimp by and hope that there was a curve. And then there's just generic stupid people that no, but
there's none of those.
But I actually, another guest I had on it's been a couple months now. Same thing. One of the smartest guys I know and a terrible student. He had a terrible time with classes. He was lazy. He didn't want to go, all these things. And then later in life, it's like there's this new thirst for knowledge. And especially going back to the digital age thing, you can learn anything you want now. You can learn about whips and watches and things. Whereas before you used to have to go to the library and get a book out and it was out of date already. So, or buy, encyclopedias.
Oh yeah. I remember those. I used to actually have a whole collection of encyclopedias. I remember back in the day, the little Encyclopedia Britannica sales guy would come and.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. That was a thing. That's funny.
Yeah. So, so continue on. So you get out of school and what happens next?
Oh man, that's where it gets. So my parents ended up splitting up when I was 18 going on 19. They had stayed together through school, that whole thing, which is kind of a terrible idea. But no, when they split, I kind of went my own way too, which I'll be honest, I probably did it way too early, which is why I ended up not finishing. I went to Blue Ridge Community College, ended up not finishing because I was working too. This is where it gets a little weird. So I worked at a gas station part-time nights, and I also played poker kind of full-time back when I was 19 to 20, which led me to a lot of stress because I remember just like being super paranoid sometimes and things like that and super nervous, which I guess prepped me for entrepreneurship later. I don't know. Yeah. But yeah, I ended up getting promoted actually at the gas station. I ended up getting promoted into a management position, and I was 20 years old. I was making about like $31K, which is not much now, but when I was 20, I might as well just won the lottery.
Yeah.
Right. So I actually dropped school at that point and went through doing retail management for a while. Got to about 2007. Money started to dry up real bad in retail. I'd gotten out of convenience stores and went into like traditional retail. I actually worked at Sears in 2007, which was a terrible place to be at the time. And then I went through this weird year when I was 23, where I had I think eight W-2s in 1 year. I was just trying all these things. If it sounded cool, I was going to do it.
Sure.
I just needed to get a little bit of money. I ended up moving back in with my mom. That's a whole thing too, which was kind of we do much better if we don't live together. Especially back then. Now, not so much. Like,
right.
Over a decade later, it's different. But no, I ended up having all these jobs. I met my wife. I worked at a portrait studio for a little while because I was like, I want to learn how to take pictures. I might as well get paid to learn instead of pay someone else to learn. So I did, and I got good at it. My wife ended up going to school for it. She's a professional photographer. So I like it because we met. Like, that was how we got together.
Yeah.
Went back into convenience stores. She was at SCAD in Savannah, Georgia. She decided to come to the Art Institute of Charlotte, which was grossly oversold to her. Like grossly oversold what they would do and what programs they offered. But when she moved closer, I decided to move down here too, and I ended up changing over into sales. Like it was kind of a sales retail type situation, truck accessory place selling truck accessories to different types of places, which was weird because the products were good, but the company was kind of awful. And I stayed there for about 4.5 years, 5 years. Went into corporate sales I've told you about when I did the industrial safety products and stuff like that, the OSHA situation, and then went from that to when my father-in-law passed away, which I've told you a little bit about before. I don't want to go into that whole story because it's an awful story. It did not go well. I mean, he passed away, so of course it didn't go well.
Yeah.
But he also was very ill prepared. Like there was no life insurance. He had a union job, so there's a pension, but it took 2 years for the pension to pay.
Yeah.
Which didn't do anything from getting my mother-in-law's car repossessed a year after. And it got me really interested in finance, which is how I got into the world I'm in now as a financial professional. It got me interested first in like the life insurance side of things, but also assets and IRAs and stuff like that. And that's where I got into the world I ended up coming into now.
Yeah. Well, and I wanted to lead up to that as well. I know that you're limited on what you can say with finance, but I think that personality and depth of knowledge is important in that sort of thing. Because, I mean, I run across people all the time that don't know the difference in an IRA and a mutual fund. The terms are just, all they know is that's a financial term. So you have to have a little bit of depth of knowledge and what's going on, as well as depth of what's going on in the economy, what's going on with these businesses, what's going on with the S&P. Like you have to understand that you have to pay attention. You have to know the details. And that's why I've always thought that, you're a good person to do that because you obsess over details.
Yes, very much so.
So yeah. Luckily I haven't had to live through those disasters, but I've seen them from a distance where assets are not managed well. There's no will, there's no life insurance. You're having to deal with the burden of the loss and there's no money. It compounds the pain that person's going through.
It compounds pain. It actually does a little more than that too. Like outside of the compounding the pain, and I'm hopefully won't get in trouble for this next part. Not professionally, because I can deal with that more than I can with my wife. But no, it doesn't just compound the pain. It actually it builds resentment too.
Sure.
It kind of creates this like, how were you so unprepared? Because like here, unfortunate story. I ended up taking off Monday this week because at midnight Sunday night, we got a call from my mother-in-law because when she was taking care of my father-in-law before he passed away, she had a stroke. So she ended up being a kidney patient and diabetic. She can live on her own. She didn't for a while. She lived in our living room for a year, which was awful. And she was very anti-alcohol, which might be the most I ever drank, funny enough. And we called it tea. We called it whiskey tea. But I'm not even kidding. I'm a 32-year-old man having to hide a drink in my house. And I'm like, I don't even drink that much. But no, she had to go take her to the hospital because of where she's at. And there's all of these things with the diabetic and the kidney problems. My wife is still an unpaid caretaker for her mom, which is hard. She's a full-time mother herself. Like she stays home with our kids, our son. We have a 4-year-old. But on top of that, like she takes care of her mom full-time unpaid. And that is a hard thing to do. And it's one of those things, again, with some preparation, something. There'd be some way to do stuff. We have nothing on that. And it still to this day kind of puts her, she's very anxious a lot of times. Like if her phone rings late at night, is this the call? Like, what is this call going to be? Yeah. If her phone goes off or something and she doesn't recognize, if she doesn't recognize a number, she gets panicked because she's like, is this a neighbor calling? Like there's so much to it that people don't think about. And it's solely on her. So she's driving to Gastonia and back probably 3 times a week. She does her mom's medicine. Like there's a lot to it. So yeah, that preparation, it's not like, oh, this bad thing happened and we weren't prepared for it. It's like, no, that fallout kind of follows you. I mean, it's 2016. It's Thanksgiving 2016. We're at 2020. It's been 4 years and we're still following the fallout.
in the circle of life, there's health and there's family, there's friendships, relationships, career, all these things that we talk about on the podcast all the time. And balance is really important, in my opinion, for a well-rounded life. If you let one of the spokes on that tire go flat, you're going to have a flat tire. So that could be family. It could be relationships. It could be any of those. But finance is one of those that a lot of people, they just say, someday I'll deal with that. And I think that's super dangerous, because you see people who are pretty well off in this life, and they typically have had somebody that was smart enough to say, I'm going to leave them some money. I'm going to set myself up for in case I'm not in the picture, which is a really hard thing to do. It's actually it's humbling when you start looking at life insurance and you look at long-term health care and some of those insurances. You think, well, I'm not going to get that money. You're going to be gone.
Yes.
But it shows you that you care and you love your family, because you want them to have a better life, if there is such a thing after you pass, where you say, look, I'm not here anymore to help you, but at least you don't have to worry about money. At least you've got a little cash. At least you can pay for the funeral without having to swipe a credit card. I mean, at least that, So again, if anybody's listening, reach out, email me, Dalton, whatever, and just have a meeting. For me, and I'm not saying I have all my ducks in a row either, but early on I realized you hear all these graphs and stories about, well, the guy that started investing when he was 20 has more money, all that stuff. So I still started late, but I remember having coffee with a guy from Edward Jones, I believe, or something. And I just picked his brain for a long time. And I taught myself, well, what's an IRA and what's a 401k and what's a 403b? And I still don't know all the details, but I understood then, an IRA is just the bucket. It's just the thing. And then, you put stocks and bonds and mutual funds into that bucket. It's just a vehicle. So just those basics. Like, I think the common person needs to know the basics. I don't think finance is taught well enough in schools.
Oh, definitely not.
It's definitely not taught well enough in the home. It's awkward to talk with people about it, because there feels, I think people feel the need to expose, like, here's how much my salary is. And that's dangerous too, because it's important, because there's always in the back of your mind somebody thinking, well, easy for you to say because you make a lot of money. And they have no idea. They don't know how much you make. And when you put out the dollar amount, here's how much I make. A really wise person I knew one time said, when you know somebody's salary, it can only do two things. It makes you prideful, or it makes you jealous. So basically you think, well, that's all they make. Well, I make a lot more than them. Or you think, he doesn't deserve that money. Like, I work harder than that person. So you don't need to know the number. You need to work on your own number, and you need to work within your financial sphere. If you can only save $10 a month, then save $10 a month. If you can save $1,000 a month, save $1,000. And I know, and as well, like, I taught the Dave Ramsey Financial Peace courses. And I mean, I got to where I wasn't shocked when I would have people that were just massively in debt, massively hurting and struggling financially, because they just didn't pay attention, or they had a bad hand dealt to them, where somebody left them stuff to deal with or whatever. But then on the other side, there were folks that you kind of would judge ahead of time and say, well, they're probably not doing too great. And then you find out, wow, this dude's saving $900 a month.
Well, there's actually a book called The Millionaire Next Door. It's an older book. It's Stanley and Danko. I can't remember their first names. It's not Stanley Danko. Those are two last names, because it was two authors on the book. But the whole point of The Millionaire Next Door is exactly that. Like, if you're in a regular little suburban neighborhood like you live in, like I live in, whatever, there's a pretty good chance there's probably a millionaire somewhere in your neighborhood and you don't know it.
Yeah.
Because they don't measure money necessarily in the money. They measure it in time. Like, if I had to stop working tomorrow, how long can I go before I have to go back? And maybe they drive a little beat up Ford. Maybe they drive a little cheap car, but it's paid for.
Yep.
Maybe they live in, I don't know, 2,500 square foot house instead of a 4,500 square foot house. But again, it's got a mortgage so low that if they had 3 bad months in a row in their businesses, they'd be fine. So there's a lot to that. And also what you're talking about, like as far as teaching, like I've had clients I've sat down with who've never actually noticed their net worth, which net worth's pretty simple. It's assets minus debt. And what's left is your net worth. And some people are shocked to find that sometimes it's negative. And that happens. And that happens because what you're talking about too with debt, like student loans, for example, that's one that blows my mind because they're guaranteed. Because they're government backed and guaranteed. Their lenders can be very reckless. And what I mean by that is if you were to take a 17-year-old to a car dealership, right, and be like, I'm going to buy this, let's go cheap. I'm going to buy an $18,000 Kia, right? And you took a 17-year-old. It's like, well, do you have a job? No, but I might in 4.5 years, 5 years, give or take. You're not going to find any dealership in the world. It's like, oh, cool. That's fine. Here you go. We trust you. Don't pay us for 4 years. In 5, we'll ask you for it due. We'll tell you what's due in 5. No way. If you went and tried to buy a house for $100,000, like let's say you bought a cheap house for like $100,000, which is roughly what a full-on like school loan can cost right now, right?
Yeah.
There is no lender in the world that's going to go, oh, you're not working, you have no real prospects for income.
Absolutely.
And you're going to school and not
no money down.
No money down, and not being offensive, but you're going to school for liberal arts, which means like your job prospects aren't even very high.
Yep.
Sure. Here's $80,000, no big deal. Pay us back when you can.
I heard Elon Musk say this last week. He was saying that essentially, and I'm not going to be able to quote him, but he essentially said like college and formal education is not anymore how people learn. It's you learn through the internet. You learn, of course you have to have the aptitude and the willingness to go learn it, but we could pull out a cell phone right here and start to learn Portuguese if we wanted to. Mm-hmm. Like you can learn on the bus, you can learn on the porch, anything you want. You can learn how to make a whip. You can learn how to, how a watch is manufactured. You can learn anything. I think the thing that school probably brings is it sort of forces you to say, hey, I know you don't really like math, but you should learn some math. Mm-hmm. You should learn some history, some well-roundedness, because it is, I wouldn't say it's dangerous, but you can get into a slippery slope of like, well, I really like this, and that's all you ever do.
That's fair.
And sometimes you need to learn a little history. Sometimes you need to learn how to spell. Like I didn't learn how to spell, for instance. So, but education, I think in the future is going to change a lot.
I think you're right. And also I would say the well-roundedness is true, but that's also part of the problem. Like if you look at how much college costs, it's because of how many classes you got to take.
Right.
You have doctors taking calculus classes they're not going to use.
Right.
You have lawyers taking algebra classes that are irrelevant to what they do. Yeah. Whereas, some history and some more law, some more anatomy classes for doctors, things like that. You get a degree in finance, the next thing you know, you're taking a ton of literature classes, which, like there's a relative importance. Like you should learn how to speak. You should probably know how to read pretty well and stuff like that. But that's handled by the time you get to college. Mm. If you're not well-rounded after 12 years of grade school, what the heck were you doing?
Well, and I guess that's what I'm saying. When I'm talking about education, I'm more focusing on higher ed. Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, I totally agree. When you're a senior in high school by 18, you should be able to read, write, spell, know what World War II was. You should know some of the basics. Basic algebra. You should be able to go to the grocery store and determine which cereal is cheaper, things like that. But when we're talking higher education, that is prep for the workplace.
Right.
I would say, and again, my wife's in education, so if she listens to this, she'll have a differing opinion, but those are the fundamentals, the building blocks of this is how you survive in society. Mm-hmm. And then you go to college and you learn a profession. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, we'll see what this turns out to be, but I see a lot of people jumping ship to do things that people are not willing to do, like welding, driving trucks, mm-hmm. things that were formerly looked at as like, oh, well, that's not a good profession. You need to be in, marketing, or you need to be a banker or whatever. But they're getting paid more to do jobs because no one wants to do it. It's supply and demand. I think also a big wave that's coming that has not totally hit yet is when in the STEM fields, development of code,
big time,
is so under educated, I guess you would say. People are not learning that stuff fast enough. They're not teaching it in high school for sure. I know one person that in my sphere that teaches Swift from Apple. He teaches those classes in the summer, and he teaches like a camp, and you come and you learn how to build an app. Meanwhile, everybody you see walking down the street has a smartphone with apps on it.
Right.
So why are these kids not learning how to code at an early age? And I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but it doesn't happen a lot. There are schools that are doing it. I think that it goes back to with education. If you're a fantastic developer, why would you teach when you can triple your salary in the market? You know, so there's not many teachers out there that are willing to sacrifice their pay or whatever to go into to teach kids.
Well, that's part of it too. We have shown. I'm not going to get like super political and stuff or anything like that. But no, we've shown this year above all else, like how little we actually value teachers and things like that. And that's part of the problem. Like, oh, teach our kids, babysit our children. We need you to be at work to babysit our kids, but we don't really want to pay you. And like the fact that you want some benefits and stuff is ridiculous. Don't ask for it. And that blows my mind. It's we value educators and we actually, even like things like college, like you get a degree in psychology, you become a therapist. Without the medical part of it, we value that very little too. There's almost no money in it. Yeah. The amount of people I have worked with or hired over like when I was in retail sales and stuff like that have degrees in psychology, that's where they end up. Sure. They end up in sales or management or HR. Yep. Because there's more money there. Like they actually went to school to look at doing like therapy and doing stuff like that, but without getting an actual medical license to prescribe medicine, there's so little money in it that they're better off just to be HR to company. Yeah. Like it makes no sense. Like it kind of blows my mind how that works, but also no one wants to change the school system. And this is getting a little political, but I don't care. It's fine. It's on both sides. Everyone's shooting for the next election. Everyone's shooting to get reelected. That's the game. We don't make plans 12 years out. Right. You're not going to see like a Green Deal or a New Deal right now because that's not going to win an election tomorrow. Right. You're not seeing stuff. Like, and there used to be a time that didn't matter. We still did things like that. Some of them worked, some of them didn't, whatever. I'm not going to get super deep on that, but you're probably not going to see those big sweeping moves because we live in a world of Twitter. Like, technology has made education easier, but it's also made information so readily available that you can start a website and start a rumor and you can have a news story.
Well, something as simple as the way we digest music, for instance, has changed. I mean, we're going to sound like old guys, but again, this weekend at the family reunion, my brother and my wife, and we were talking about music and how it used to be. My favorite gift at Christmas was a CD. Like you would, and for us it was CDs in the generation, but it was records and tapes and all. But you had the art, the physical disc. You had to have a player. Hopefully it didn't skip. It was
don't scratch it. Yeah.
Yeah. It was it was an experience. And then you would have an investment. Like I spent $20 on this DVD or this CD. I'm going to listen to that sucker. And you would listen to it over and over again and really listen to the songs. And even my first CD actually was Melancholy and Infinite Sadness from the Smashing Pumpkins. And it's a double disc. So that's an investment. You got to listen to that baby for a long time.
Well, yeah, and if you listen to that entire CD, you're probably gonna be a little sad. Yeah, they nailed the melancholy part of that. I remember that album. Yeah,
yeah, wow. But nowadays it's a fly by night, one hit wonder sort of thing.
But I will say this: but there's an argument to be made on that because here's the thing: as an artist, actually, as a lot of things, one, record labels have less hold. There's not as many as there could be, but you have people like Tyler, the Creator, who's a rapper who's basically done everything independent. You have people like Donald Glover, who has not signed a single record deal ever, and he's had multiple #1 hits. Like, that's changing. The barrier for entry is changing because you don't have to, that whole process, you get discovered, that's gone. But also, it's forcing artists to kind of actually tour to make money because you used to tour to sell your album. You made money on the album sales, but you can't. You're not going to get a whole album. And it's also causing people to make more songs that aren't filler. Because, like, I remember, I won't There's been a few albums I remember buying, and I'm like, man, the 3 songs on the radio are the only things that are good on this thing. The
I
rest of it
agree.
is crap. I'm like, what? I paid $20 for this?
Yeah.
Like that. See, like my nostalgia, I guess, is a little different because I remember being.
Well,
like,
don't
oh,
get me wrong though. I want to clarify. I'm not saying that then was better.
right.
There's goods and bads about both because you're totally right. I mean, there were records. I can think of one in particular, the Goo Goo Dolls. I remember thinking, man, these 3 or 4 songs are really good, and then they let the bass player sing on these other ones, and they were terrible. And it's like, yikes! They needed 12 or 15 songs because there was a commitment. Now we're starting to see like I don't know if it's the most recent, but in the recent couple of years, John Mayer released like 3 or 4 songs in like a miniature version of the album, and then he released 3 or 4 more, and then a few months later it's like that's the compilation, which combined is this one piece of art, but it was perfect. And I found even just with the pace of life, I would listen to that John Mayer album as I was getting ready, and by the time I got ready for work, showered, got in the car, I was done with that little piece, and so I was able to enjoy it. And then later, when I have time to listen to the whole thing, I'm like, oh, yeah, I like that song. I had digested it differently.
That's
And
awesome, though.
I think it's awesome. And I think those challenges, even though they're different, I think they're really good.
But there's also another side of that coin, though. This is my brain going all over the place here. There's another side of that coin, though, is you don't have the natural discovery you used to have. And the reason being is because record labels know, like, hey, this is a different world. But there's also all these metrics that people can now study. So it's like, oh, we want things that sound like this. We want things that sound like X, Y, Z. And you end up with a bunch of stuff that sounds the same instead of this weird, who the heck are those guys? Where they come from? And also from a funny story from like a record, and all that stuff way back in the day with records, there was a guy who used to live in the suburban side of Liverpool out that way who was really into blues, right? There's another guy that lived out in some other part of the country out in like the UK. And these 2 guys would always go to this record shop in London. And they ended up meeting several times. And they're like, oh, you're into blues? I'm into blues. They would have to go to just one record store to find these blues albums, right? Yeah. And the different people, it was actually Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, which is what made the Rolling Stones exist, because they met that way, which I kind of love. Like, I think that's like fascinating, just how this whole band came together, because they were getting blues albums in the UK and they lived on other sides of the continent.
Well, and again, it's not to point out that, those old times were better or worse. There are some things that I'll miss, and I know like my children won't understand what it's like to open a CD, but that's okay. The future, I think, going back to like that, how do we have to shift education? How do we have to shift our younger generation is let's learn to take the tools that we have, because again, the cell phone, it's amazing. The cell phone is now a camera. It's a canvas.
I can scan documents from my camera. Like, there's scanning apps. There's all that stuff.
It's amazing. And I think truly the future is in the minds of some younger people that don't know how to develop their idea. Because right now, if you had a great idea to put into a cell phone or into a computer, I mean, you have to have a startup cost. You have to know how to run a company to get the app developed. I hope to see in the future schools and people learning to code better. And I think also there's probably coming, it's already sort of here in a way, where if you take something like website development, 10 or 15 years ago, it was a really big cost to get a website developed. And it still is if you want something custom.
Right.
But if you just need to slap up some pictures and contact information, you can just sign up for Squarespace or Wix, and you can just, use a template. Well, where did the template come from? Good developers that made code that codes for you. And I think that that's the future too, because that barrier to entry in the coding world is really high. You have to understand logic. You have to understand if or loops. You have to understand the whole thing just to do some basic code.
Right.
And I have told this story before, but in my coding experience in college, there's just the unknowns. Like I was, it's sort of embarrassing, but
oh, by all means, please, let's go. Yes, tell the embarrassing story.
I was developing some sort of an app in Java, and Java's a really boring language. You don't get much benefit from it when the end product is just a bunch of text, and it's really complicated engineering behind. So we were coding, the little triangle game at Cracker Barrel, the pins.
Yes.
We were coding the instructions on how to beat that game. So the game, the code would figure out the game, and you had to figure out the logic, which essentially it's trial and error. You jump pins until you figure out the perfect combination to win the game, and it can do it very fast. And then when you finally, okay, there's one pin left, you print the instructions to the user. So at the end of the day, if it works, you know, there's all that. Well, you have to consider so many different things. Like, it's not a square board, it's a triangle. Well, how do you make a triangle in virtual space? There's a lot of things.
I never thought about that.
But the embarrassing part was at some point in the code, I needed to calculate the square root of a number.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking, well, how does one go about turning ones and zeros into square roots? So I had a page of code that would calculate the square root to 3 decimal points. And I was really proud of myself, and it took forever, and I was so stuck on it. And when I went to the teacher and submitted the code, he was like, whoa, what's this? You know, and he said, you do know you could just type pound include math and then type SQRT square root, and all that code's already done for you to like 10 decimal points. And I just thought, it's your fault. You should have taught me that.
So you basically made a page of code that
already existed.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And again, I mean, he probably did teach me, and I wasn't paying attention. So, you know, it's not his fault. But yeah, those are the things that, from an educational standpoint, we need great teachers that say, and not just, hey, here's a project, go figure it out, but looking over your shoulder and say, hey, wait, before you start doing that code, this has already been done for you. This is great code. And I think also those STEM topics, for me as an engineer, we focused a lot on efficiency, because you might be able to make some great code that does a really cool thing, but it burns your battery up. So you have to think about, could we do that program in a more efficient way to where we can get the same result with less power usage? Like, a lot of people don't think about that, but that's a very important thing.
Especially on mobile phone. Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, but the same person will complain that their battery dies on their iPhone. It's like, man, this iPhone that fits in my pocket only lasts for 15 hours, you know, before I have to charge it, like wirelessly charge it.
15 hours is actually pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I finally got a Moto G Power, which is not even an expensive phone. I've actually found, I think I talked to you a little about this. Judging by what I really like, because I used to love phones. I used to get like the latest, greatest, and now I kind of go on the more of like that $400 phone range.
Yep.
Because on an Android side, they use 600 processors instead of 800, which is less powerful, but it also is so much more battery efficient.
Yeah.
And they still have 1080p screens instead of the 240, because the 2400, the 2440 it looks good, but it's kind of irrelevant on a screen that small, and also it pushes so much power.
Yeah. Well, the new iPhone that was just released last week actually is the first 5G Apple device. So I think that's going to be
yes,
it's going to be a groundbreaker, because you need a big company to kind of put their foot in the pool before everybody jumps in. Just like in Charlotte, I've talked about this before, but when Google Fiber was announced in Charlotte, all of a sudden AT&T and Time Warner have it. Oh, right. We've got that too, you know. And so the competition is going to rise.
Good. Yes.
And now that there's going to be antennas out there, people are going to use them. But all that to say, the point is that the battery life on the iPhone is a lot less when it's using 5G, because it's more processing.
New. Well, yeah,
and it's new, and there's
new.
You know.
It's
so
like the when the first 4G what was it? It was an HTC phone. It was one of the first 4G phones. I didn't get it, but a friend of mine got it, and that thing, it had like a 2-hour battery life. I'm not even joking. It was awful. They put so much effort into the 4G that they forgot to make the rest of the phone. I'm not even kidding. It's like they rushed the product.
Yeah. Well, and that's I guess, going back to education, tying all this stuff together. We need smart people to figure out these big problems. You know, like if you look at, I know people like him or hate him, but I love the Elon Musk, like just his character in person is like this mad scientist. I mean, he's drilling holes under LA. He's making electric cars, shooting rockets off. Like, he's doing all the stuff that when I was a big fan of G.I. Joe toys as a kid, I feel like he's making that stuff. Flamethrowers, you know.
That is true. I see that. Yeah.
And it's like those things to me are exciting, because I'm reading a business book right now. I can't remember the name of it. It's not great, so I won't quote it. But
I was like, you're clear. I'm reading a business. I can't remember the name. I'm like, oh, it must be doing a lot for you.
Yeah, I think it's called Traction. I think it's called Traction. So I'm not all the way through it. I can't judge it yet. But the point is that they were requoting somebody saying that if you don't take a risk, you don't reap the reward. So you have to take a risk sometimes to be able to reap the reward. And that's, I mean, that's sort of common knowledge in a way.
You'd think there are people who I think that their goal in life is to never take risk. I have met them.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Granted, like talking on the financial side, like we talk risk profiles, sure, but like not even outside of risk profiles, you can see it in their entire life.
Oh yeah.
Like, oh, you're in a safe neighborhood in a safe house.
So how do you think somebody balances that though? Because as an entrepreneur, myself and you as well, like it's a huge risk. It's very scary, very risky. But as an engineer, I take what I call calculated risks. Like I know that there's risk, but it's not a blind, I'm just going to step into this opportunity. Like you have to calculate and educate. Even currently in my business, I run an IT company. And so I'm thinking about these different worlds that I could possibly get into. Technology is always changing. And it's risky, but I'm calculating like, is the reward worth it? I'm looking at that reward and saying, is that really worth taking the risk and spending even 15, 20% of my time to start this division that might make me half a salary for one of my employees? When you see those calculations, but how do you calculate risk? What do you look at? Do you look at the reward? Do you look at the devastation? How do you calculate your risks?
It's both. It's simply like the simple phrase is like, is the juice worth the squeeze kind of thing? Like, the first part is how much effort will it take? And honestly, when I calculate like how much effort will something take, I tend to put in more than probably it will be because nothing's ever, it's like trying to do a home remodel or something. Like I promise you're going to need more material than you thought you did. It's going to cost more than you thought it was. There's no way you come out exactly on budget. I don't think you're even allowed to.
Right.
Like it's like a rule, an unwritten rule somewhere, right? No, it's a reward to risk. So, all right, if it goes terribly wrong, and I kind of think things backwards, like what's worst case scenario? And if worst case scenario is actually not that bad, then I'm like, I can stomach that.
Sure.
Like, I can take that hit.
Yeah.
Especially if there's a payoff. Now, if worst case scenario is not that bad, but it's also like best case scenario is not really that exciting, it's not worth it. And then the key to is the excitement. Like, is it worth it to do? Like, I mean, I recently changed firms, like you and I talked about.
Yep.
And there is definitely some risk. There's some risk of losing some clients in the process. There's a risk of what if I'm wrong? What if it's not better? Which I'm happily right. But I went a lot more independent as far as my practice goes. And to me, the reward was, hey, this is going to be long-term more what I'm trying to put together.
Yeah.
Like the vision I have for what my practice should look like is much more independent than where I was. Whereas the risk is I may lose a few clients along the way. I can stomach that. I don't want to, but I can stomach that for the long-term gain because what I will pick up here is worth it.
Yeah.
And there is also the transitionary phase of like potentially not getting paid for a month and a half, which is
right.
That's so terrifying because obviously when you're switching over, it takes time.
Yep.
And nothing happens until something happens. So that part's terrifying.
Yeah.
And I'm just now like at the end of that terrifying cycle.
Well, congratulations.
So, yeah. Thank you. Cause that was probably but again, was it worth it? Sure. Because it's a temporary, there's a very, like a month and a half, which this goes back to financial education and financial stuff. Anyway, anyone self-employed that doesn't have at least a couple months in the bank is kind of really, really riding a dangerous line because there are bad months. Things break, things happen. So
there's bad years as well.
Yes, there's bad years, there's bad quarters. Try not to have too many bad quarters, but it does happen. No one's business plan last year included everything might be shut down. Yeah. I promise you, like anyone's 5-year plan in 2015 did not include a pandemic in 2020. So things happen. And that goes back to the education side too, because like even that part, the simple stuff, like why would that matter? Like why do I need to? I get paid every week, right? Like someone on a regular salary or whatever. It's like, well, you may not. People fall off curbs and break their ankles. Things happen. And there's also, not to get too much into the advice part, but also from a school perspective, what we were talking about earlier, people don't even know that whether they're self-employed or not, they probably are in some kind of business. And people don't know it because you were talking about like mutual funds, IRAs, and stuff like that. at the end of the day, anyone who's going to do well off is in something that's not solely dependent on them.
Yeah.
So maybe you're a doctor, maybe you run an IT company, whatever, but your business might not actually be that. Your business might be stocks. Your business might be real estate. Like I got that from like Rich Dad Poor Dad back when Robert Kiyosaki's books were still good. Sorry, like I know that's rough to say, but no, the first few were really good, but then it just gets a little preachy and repetitive after that. I'm like, I wanted my money back. But no, like but that's a solid thing for people to remember is like, what is your focus on? What is your goal? Because a lot of people, what we were talking about before, a lot of people don't even know. They're just kind of along for the ride, man. They're strapped in. Someone else is driving. Someone else built the seat. Someone else did everything. And they're just kind of, hey, hopefully no one crashes.
This is, again, to sound like an old man, the generation that I think we're maybe at the top of, and there's younger, has not had a ton of adversity for the most part, and it's, you sort of need a little bit of a struggle, I think, to appreciate.
I don't know that I agree with that.
Yeah.
Actually,
I mean, in comparison to the 40s and the 20s and Vietnam, World War II.
I mean, you got 9/11, you've got Afghanistan, you've got Iraq. Like, there's a lot of, there is literally a generation of people who probably graduated high school during a time that the Patriot Act came into effect. So when they started to travel became really hard. These same people went to school and graduated college right around the time a recession hit. Granted, it's been completely bull market for almost the entire time since.
Yeah.
So like, yes, on a roundabout way, it's fine.
Yeah.
From a purely looking at the numbers standpoint, but people are still pretty traumatized by it because a lot of people couldn't find jobs. Yeah. And you have an entire generation of people who basically graduated college, I don't know, 80, 70, 80 grand in debt to get a job paying like $25K a year because people could get away with it. Like, hey, other places are closing their door. We don't have to pay you but like 40. I know you're in engineering and we're supposed to pay 70 or 80, but like at these current times, it's like the moniker excuse. And I think we'll see it again. Honestly, we'll see it this year. Like, oh, well, you still have your job during these times.
Yeah. Well, and you're right. I mean, I think depending on the snapshot of time, maybe it's better, maybe it's worse. I mean, we've grown up in a time where, 9/11 was scary, but we weren't being shipped off overseas, in the draft and things like that. Financial times have been hard, but they bounced back quick, and to look at just the instant gratification a lot of people have with cell phones, with all that stuff. And I'm in technology, man. I get it. I understand.
Well, yeah, but the world moves faster too. Because here's the thing.
It does.
Like you said, we bounced back quick. We didn't just bounce back. We bounced back and broke records quick.
It was fast.
But that's not the only thing. Everything's fast. Which goes back to what we're saying, why people won't change education system, because that's not going to be fast.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. Again, don't get me wrong that I'm saying like, oh, these young people need to get their act together. There are some. But it's new burdens. Like our parents and our grandparents didn't have to worry about clearing 200 or 300 notifications a day on their cell phone from emails, texts, instant messengers.
It's very first world, but yes,
it is. But it's you notice the spike of anxiety and stress.
Oh, there definitely is. There's actually studies that say it. Like, I mean, it's actually funny. Like, if you ever notice, sometimes it might take me a while to text you back, which I know client focus is terrible, right? But no, like I don't even know what my phone sounds like because I have not had it. I'm not even kidding. I bought this phone about 3 months ago. I have not had the sound on other than an alarm since I bought it.
Yeah.
I leave it on vibrate. If it's nearby, I'll check it. But if not, I won't. But see, it's funny. That's what you're saying. Cause there's other stresses too. Cause you're also seeing a generation of people who have to take care of both their kids and their parents. Yeah. With Gen Xers, you're seeing a generation of people who may actually be taking care of their adult kids and their parents, which is super weird. Yeah. And super expensive. And that's why sometimes when I hear like, oh, we don't have adversity, I'm like, I mean, I hear people say that, and like not to be like okay boomer about it, but sometimes I am a little okay boomer about it because I'm like, no, people have struggled here too. It's not been an easy run.
Yeah, I mean, there's always adversity. So to say that there's none is not true. But the type and the amount, people are living longer, people are healthier. We're so much wiser than we were. You think about even food that people were eating 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We have options, it's a pretty good life. So, and I'm not trying to get on a high horse here about, again, being the old guy.
No, that's fine. No,
I'm more of a boomer, even though I'm not.
Well, no, and sometimes I am too. And that's the thing. I think most people, if they're really honest with themselves, that's the problem too, is people try to segment. Like the world has been segmented so much because of marketing, because we have all these metrics now, social media and stuff, right? So we can segment you, we can segment this person, we can segment that person. Problem is people are complex. People aren't simple.
Right.
People have complex like their thought processes, the mechanisms behind what they do are actually pretty complicated. Where they grew up, how they grew up. There's so many things that are unknown on metrics. So I feel like when people put people metrics, because I promise you that there are probably some people over the age of 50 that think younger than some people under the age of 30. I've actually met them on both sides. I have met 30-year-olds that I think a new idea would hurt them.
Yeah.
I've met 55-year-olds who are coming up with new ideas every day. So like to assume that is definitely reckless, but also, no, it's just the world itself has just changed. Although it's funny you say like we're getting smarter. I'm like, I don't know. We used to be talking about cloning sheep, and now we're debating whether the earth is flat, and everyone's a professional immunologist all of a sudden. But
I go back to, I think a lot of at least my philosophies and ideologies boil down to individual responsibility, because you can't control when you were born, where you were born,
absolutely,
how you look, how tall you are. You can't control anything, but what you can control is your circumstances and how they happen to you and what you do with them. That's about all you can do.
100%.
So I guess my big point here is that, we need to wake up and look and say, life is pretty good. The ability to communicate is better than it's ever been. Food is better than it's ever been. Can it get better? Possibly.
Well, no, and you're right. And like even looking at, like, we live in a world where a pandemic probably didn't cause the end of the world.
Yeah.
Like people being as reckless as possible, there's still enough like that. We have gotten to a place where like society is actually kind of a little bit better off than we really think we are. So I definitely agree with that. But I would also say that adversity is not a bad thing. And here's what I mean.
No, I don't think it is. I think it's a good thing, in fact.
I think it's a very good thing because, like, and again, this is not advice, but everything's expensive right now. Yeah. Stocks are expensive. Homes are expensive in Charlotte, especially. Like, things are expensive. And I have clients that have just bought houses because it made sense. Their rent went up. Yeah. It's like, my rent went up. I could buy a house. So go ahead. Like, sure. I don't blame you. It's a great idea. Me personally, I already own a house. And I told my wife, I was like, there's no way. Like, you cannot talk me into buying a house in a market where I'm going to offer you over your asking price. I'm going to pay closing cost, and I'm going to pay for the remodel, like for any of the renovations that have to be done for you to get out of the house. Sure. No. That is not a world I buy a house in. Yeah. I'm more of the person that's like, you're paying a closing cost. I'm going to offer under, you're going to take the offer because the other offer's not as good. Like, that's where I bought my last house, and I came out like a bandit.
Well, timing isn't, again, going back to the timing and where we happen to live, and in the retirement world, if you were ready to retire and 2008 hits,
you're not.
Tough luck. Like, well, it just stinks, I mean,
it depends. It depends. If there was a plan in place that had you, if you were in a good spot at that time, yeah, and you weren't like completely dependent upon the market, which that close to retirement you probably should have been, you'd been all right. Yeah. But no, for the most part, there are a lot of people that and actually, where a lot of people messed up too is a lot of people reacted. A lot of people sold. A lot of people freaked out. The market dipped down because a lot of people freaked out. And really, if they hadn't, mathematically, they'd have been better off. Sure. Well, and that's what I'm saying is I don't think adversity is bad at all. I think it's, in fact, really good for us to, that's, again, the whole podcast, overcoming average. Like, nobody wants to be average. Nobody thinks, yeah, I'd love to just be an average guy. Oh, man, I'm going to be marvelously mediocre, amazingly average, marvelously mediocre, and just absolutely adequate today. But it's perfect. Like, how do you do that? Well, it depends on the thing. When it comes to finance, 2008 hits, you need to at least have some sort of a plan for if a 2008 happens. Stay in the market longer.
diversify, whatever the plan is, have a plan. If it doesn't work out, you got to be willing to move.
And that's the part where it's person to person. It depends on how much they have. Like there's so many things. This is why I don't like, this is why when I was telling you before the thing, like I won't go deep. First off, there is actually rules about it, but I also won't go deep on stuff because it's blanket statements and I hate blanket statements.
Agreed.
People are so different. People are so individual. And like, this is where you and I have disagreed. Cause like, as far as some of the stuff in like Dave Ramsey's book and course, some of it I totally agree with. Some of it I'm like, depends on the person.
Well, I agree with you. It goes to the individual, and to kind of defend Dave Ramsey a little bit.
Well, I mean, it's okay. He's fine. He'll just call me a moron. It's cool.
Right.
But no, that's actually the thing too. Is like I feel like in the entertainment industry, because it is entertainment, and I get why they do it.
Yeah. There's
a lot of shame. It's a lot of shaming people into better behaviors, which psychologically speaking actually doesn't work at all. Never has. You look at kids that were shamed into behaving right. You see people who are very not well adjusted. Like that's a psychological fact. But these shows, I think they find some people in some terrible shape to bring on the show. And again, it's for entertainment because like you watch this and you're like, man, I'm not as bad as that person. Oh my gosh. Like, yeah, get him. Tell him how bad he is. Like that's,
I wouldn't call it shame. It's the approach that I think Dave Ramsey takes is it's not shame. It's hard truth. Hey, you overspent. You got to stop spending.
And most people do. A lot of people do, especially when you hear people on the show. When you hear people, like, because some of those people that called in, like you see people making 30, 40 grand a year with 70, 80 grand in credit card debt, which I don't even know how.
Well, again, that's why I think Dave Ramsey, it's not for everybody, but I would say it's for most everybody. For, the rules I think he's rigid on, because if on his particular show he says, well, for you, it's a little bit different.
Then it gets a questionable.
Then everybody goes, oh, well, I can. Because that's the thing with Dave Ramsey. I've met a lot of people, you being one of them, that says, well, I like Dave Ramsey, everything except this one slice. And I totally get it. Like for some people, you can play the numbers game a little bit better maybe than the average person, especially being in finance. But some of those things like save $1,000 in your emergency fund.
Well, there's no one that's ever going to tell you that's bad advice. Like, have $1,000 in emergency fund is great. I'd actually say, if you own a home, you should probably have 3 or 4 because your AC is probably going to go out, and that costs roughly 4 or 5 to fix.
Sure, but there's a lot of people. I was one of those people at the time that say, I'm not comfortable with 1,000. Like you would think that a lot of people say, I don't need 1,000. I'm just going to keep $100. There's a lot of people that say, well, I'm going to keep $1,000 and another 5,000 because I'm not comfortable with only 1,000. But again, going to his strategy, he's saying, take that money and dump it on your car and pay your car off. Then you don't have a car payment. Feel the burn a little bit, like feel uncomfortable for a period of time so that you can be comfortable. Again, his motto is, live like no one else today so that you can live like no one else in the future.
Right.
And so, again, I get the educational side of it sort of mixed in with the, it is entertainment in a way.
It's totally entertainment. It's not just him. It's Susie Orman. It's a lot of them on those shows. Yeah. And some of their advice is great. And some of their advice is awful for those people because sometimes, like for example, a Susie Orman one, you shouldn't have nice cups of coffee. Like you talked about buying like a $23 bag of coffee. Shame on you.
Yeah.
You just peed $1 million.
But see, that's not accurate. When I was teaching the Dave Ramsey course, up at my old office, I remember one particular girl came in and I had just bought AirPods, and this was when they were new, and it's kind of like a statement, right?
I've got AirPods. Figure you early adopted some new technology.
Yeah, exactly.
On Apple front specifically. Go figure.
So I have these white AirPods in my ears, and of course it's Apple technology. I'm an early adopter, and she says, well, look at you. You have AirPods. You're telling us we can't buy anything, and then you're buying AirPods. And I said, well, hang on a second.
Yeah.
The other side of Dave Ramsey is, if you listen long enough, most people that are calling Dave Ramsey are desperate. They're in debt.
Yes.
They need financial help. If you listen long enough, I would say 1 in 30 or 40 callers says, Dave, I'm here. I've got X number of dollars. I'm this many years from retirement. I'm considering buying this pickup truck. It's $35,000. Da, 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 da. And Dave will say, buy the truck. Do something nice for yourself, because they're in the stage where buy yourself a truck. You've already won the game.
There is a time that like life also life can end tomorrow. Like this,
Yeah.
this is where the balance comes in too. Because you see, like, it's not just that, you also see like the FIRE movements, another thing, financial independence, retire early, which is a whole movement about like basically be as frugal as possible. Like you see tiny houses. Like I'm not kidding. It's
Right. Yeah.
and some of it is really, to be honest with you, some of it's great advice. Like cash for things.
Sure.
Don't buy it if you can't buy it cash. Like it's not terrible depending on who you are.
Sure.
But again, that's the whole thing, is dependent. Like you'll always hear me say, depending on who you are, which is why I'll never blanket statement, because there are some things that are probably blanket good advice. Like $1,000 in your savings account, no one's gonna be hurt by that advice.
Right.
Someone who's an entrepreneur should probably have like 3 or 4 months, because you do have
Sure.
bad quarters and bad years. Like that's different.
Sure. Yeah.
That's where I would say it's a little different. Like you probably want like a few months income
Sure.
cash, but like there's just some things. There's some general things that are principles. Like you shouldn't have more than your annual salary in debt, especially consumer debt. That's just crazy.
Well, there's guidelines, and Dave Ramsey, he doesn't necessarily go over them in the baby steps, but like when purchasing a car, I can't remember his calculation, but I think he says you shouldn't have things with motors, meaning boats, motorcycles,
Boats and motorcycles where people get in a lot of trouble. Doodads is where people get in trouble.
He says you shouldn't have things with motors worth more than 1 year of salary. So if you make a combined 80 grand a year with your wife or whatever, you shouldn't have $150,000 worth of car, two $70,000, $80,000 cars, or two $50,000 cars in a boat. Like it's too heavy on that side. So those are some good frameworks where you say, okay, but where does that leave me? I make 50 grand a year. Well, you could have a car that's $20,000-$30,000 and feel okay about that.
Actually, my little Focus, and granted, it's a little Focus. It's a good little gas car. Man, I got it on a really good deal too when I bought it. But like I ended up going 16 on that, and that's why, because it is at a rate and at a level that things can be pretty bleak, and it's still going to be fine. Right. It is so well within the range of like what.
Totally.
And it's when you see people get house poor too. Like you'll see people because they qualified for a $500,000 loan, they feel like they had to take it. And it's like, well, no, you probably should have lived on 3. But
absolutely. Well, and that's the thing, is it way back to the beginning of the conversation, be intentional, be smart, think about it, come up with a plan. Because if you don't have a plan when you're going to buy a car, you're going to buy the upgrade. You're going to buy all this stuff. You're going to go over that limit. You have to have a plan. You have to set limits for the house because you will.
And you have to be able to tell. And here's what's funny too, man. People can't, and people count on this, because I remember when I was buying my car, I said what I would pay a month. Like I literally walked into a place and told them that, first off, they bait and switched, which is a whole other whatever. It was a used car first, because I've always heard don't buy a new car, which we'll get to in a minute. Because I did actually buy, first time in my life I ever bought a new car, and there's a reason why. But no, like we went and I said, this is my budget. And they came back and they're like, well, this is kind of close, but like this is a little over, da-da-da. I'm like, yeah, but this is my number. Like this is the number I want. Mm-hmm. And they come back and show me how much profit they're making on the car. And like, this is weird. They're like, look, we've cut this as much as we can. This is what we got on the trade-in for it. Da-da-da. I'm like, I hear you. I actually believe you. Like, sure, you're showing me the spreadsheet. Like, you could plug numbers in if you want. I believe you, but it doesn't matter. Right. Because this is my number. Mm-hmm. And they didn't want to hear it. So I went to a different place, and the guy actually, I was like, this is my number. And honestly, we test drove a couple cars that we didn't end up buying because they were used cars, and the interest rate was going to be a little higher than I was willing to do. And it was going to get me kind of out of my number, and I got the car. He's like, hey, I know you weren't looking at new, but you can do this. And it was like a 1.9% because it was like a through forward, whatever. It was a ridiculously good deal on the finance, and it was well within the range. Brand new car. Wasn't gonna have to worry about fixing it because we were coming out of a car that we were fixing every month. Yeah. Like there was some crap, and my wife was pregnant. We were having a baby, and I'm like, I don't want her on the side of the road in a crappy car, right? So I was like, you know what? I'll do it. He actually drove it to my work for me to test drive back to the dealership and sign the paperwork if I liked it. And that's how I ended up buying that car. And like I said, it's against some rules. Like you're not really supposed to buy new because of depreciation. But then I'm like, at a 1.9% interest rate versus a 4.5% over the course of 5 years, I'll take the depreciation hit versus the interest hit. Early payoff arrangement if I want to. Like there's a lot of terms of that I liked. So I was like, I'll take it. And all in, even with some extended warranty stuff, like the car's like $16,500. And that's the thing is you're talking about a payment that's like under $300 a month. And this was at a time in my life where I was in some transition on some job stuff too. So I was like, I was very adamant. And like this, it was so funny because people won't tell people no.
Mm-hmm.
People won't just say, because like I'm telling you, that approach probably works on someone. Like, oh, they really are trying to cut me a good deal because they're not making anything on this. What they make on it, I don't care if they made 200% profit. My number was still my number. Like it's one of those congruency things. Like A doesn't equal B. Like you're over here on XYZ and I'm on ABC. Yeah. Like this is my number for my life. What y'all make on it's not really my like.
Right.
If you can't make enough, don't sell it. That's up to you.
Yeah.
But like that doesn't encourage my buying decision.
Yeah, I mean, similar story for me. I remember years ago when one of my friends and sort of Dave Ramsey mentor in a way bought a car with cash, and I thought, who can do that? And then years later, and I'll avoid that story for now, but I found myself buying 2 cars within 2 years in cash. And of course used, but again, I walked in and said, here's the dollar amount I have. And that's it. And they tried to get me over it. I'm like, look, you can't stretch cash. So if you want to keep the car in a month, I might come back with a few $100 to throw at it, but the number is not going to stretch.
Right.
And I'm not going to take out a loan for a couple $2,000 or whatever, and they offered that to me. But again, I think, the financial devastation that people are in is so bad that I've seen people that are just in gridlock. They can't afford anything. They're just stuck. And that's where Dave Ramsey really helps to buckle down. And again, not to shame them, but just say, hey, you've got to discipline yourself with your money.
Well, and people do, but I would say actually the people in those situations are sadly in better shape. There's actually a whole segment of people in a worse situation. There's a segment of people who have lots of cash, good salary, lots of cash, good money flow, and they feel bulletproof because of it.
Yeah, that's true.
And those are people who are much like, because they don't have to. Because here's the thing. Yeah. I remember being very poor. Like when I had those AW2s I was talking about before, when I was 23, 22, I didn't have much. Like I was in a crappy apartment, ended up moving back in with my mom. I had a car I bought cash. Most of my cars I've bought cash most of my life. Still do that. I financed maybe 2 cars and I've owned 9. I had a lot of wrecks. If in case you're wondering why I've owned 9 cars, I've had a lot of wrecks when I was younger. I was crazy. But no, like, here's the thing about that though. With all of that process, when I was super poor, it wasn't actually that hard to stay out of debt because no one would lend me money.
Yeah.
And they would have been dumb to have lent me money because I was changing jobs like every 2 or 3 months, just trying to figure out. And I knew I was on a find myself kind of mission. It was fine. I wasn't trying to. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next while I had some time staying at my mom's house. Like I had that padding, right? But it was actually, and people who are in really bad financial situations where they're in a lot of debt, like, well, it's pretty easy. It's pretty easy. You need to pay your debt off. There's not much to think about there.
Sure.
No, but when you have people who have some student loan debt, but they also make a 6-7 figure, like high 6-figure kind of income, I mean, you can do a bit of both. You've got lots of options. Options is where it gets kind of scary. Like you don't have so much money that you're almost above it, which I hate to say it, but there is like a level of wealth where you're kind of, there's a time where like the hits probably won't hit that hard. Like I imagine Jeff Bezos is not going to take a hit too hard to be, you know what I'm saying? Like,
he's not going to worry about the 1.9 financing on
right. Like,
but again, it goes back to everybody, rich, poor, or everybody in between has to have a plan. You have to have a plan. You have to think about it and be intentional about it, or else you'll find yourself in a tough spot.
And that's the thing, is the intent, because this is where the mindset comes in, because there is this very individualist, like if you're in a bad place, it's probably your fault, which I get where it comes from, because like you can also take credit for your success that way, right? Because it's your fault, which I do feel that way to a point, but there's also this whole thought process of, well, I was put here, and this is what I was dealt. This is how it was. I feel that too. I actually do. I didn't used to. When I was younger, if you were in bad financial situations, it's probably because you did something stupid. When I was younger, if you were going through a bad breakup, it's probably because of you. Like I did, this was my very like non-worldly, much smaller scope of the world. I've since changed because like, no, some people's hands are dealt worse. So I now look at it through what I used to do when I was 19. I now look at the world kind of through a lens of almost like poker, right? Maybe you don't play that hand. Maybe that hand does suck. Maybe you fold and go to your next one because again, that individualist thought process is you quit, you lose, right?
Well, to an extent, because when I talk about individual responsibility,
right, and I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about in general. I'm saying this is a prevalent thing lately.
Yeah, because I understand like people see that and say, well, we were dealt a bad hand. Well, you can still win on a pair of twos.
You can, or you can fold and get a new hand.
You can.
There's options.
But
what I'm saying is there's options.
Sometimes the option, you're dealt with what you're dealt. Like, I'm never going to grow any taller. I'm never going to be. I don't have the opportunity to play in the NFL. It's just not going to happen for me.
Right.
I'm not going to be Jeff Bezos. It's too late for me. There's different things, but you have to look at reality and say, what is a win in my life? Would I be happy with this? Would I be happy with that? Like, the odds of both of us becoming Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos is virtually impossible.
I would agree.
But to be, Gary Vee says this stuff all the time. He said, you might not invent Uber. You might not be a billionaire, but could you be the most successful lawn care provider in the Huntersville area?
Yeah.
And make $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year? Absolutely. And that's a great life. So people have to put things into perspective and work hard on that goal and set a goal that's reachable. But
that's what I'm saying is that intent comes with that. Like that's one thing I like about poker is your cards matter, the odds matter, but also how you play matters.
Yes.
What you do with what you have matters. And sometimes you do have a crappy hand. Then you've got to ask yourself, does Chad feel like his hand's better than mine? Because if he doesn't, I bet I can bluff.
Yeah.
But if he does, is Chad smart enough to know his hand sucks? Because if he's too dumb to know his hand's bad, I can't bluff him because he'll actually do rookie mistakes and still win. Because that's a thing that can happen in poker.
The truth is, luck is involved.
Luck is huge. Oh, and that's also a thing too. People are like, oh, success has nothing to do with luck. I'm like,
it always has to do with luck.
Yes, like you need to capitalize on it. Because here's the thing, you can get luck as a multiplier.
Mm-hmm. It's a multiplier.
If your luck is a 5 times 0, it's still 0 because you weren't doing anything.
Right.
But if you hit a good opportunity at a good time and you're able to take advantage of it, you probably just made your workload that much less. Like,
sure.
Luck is huge. Like, anyone who says I don't believe in luck, I'm like, then you're an idiot. Like, that's not a thing. And
it's one of those things where it's a multiplier. I love that statement that luck is a multiplier because you can have bad luck. You can you can be on the way to that job interview and your car break down. It had
to happen once. Actually, literally that once. Actually,
but it's not an excuse because you missed that opportunity. Try again. If you're in the positive, if you're working towards the positive, and you get a multiplier, fantastic. But luck also, without hard work, it ends up being a 0 as well.
Right. And that's how it works because here's the thing, bad luck might be holding you back, but you can outwork it. Good luck might push you forward, but you still have to work it.
That's right.
It's like rain on your field. Like if you don't have any seeds planted, you're going to get weeds.
That's right.
And I think that's really where luck kind of tends to fall. And I think that's where people tend to fall is in that situation of like dealing what you're dealt. But this goes back to what we're talking about education is sometimes people don't know that they can fold their hand. Like this is one of the things when I used to play poker, I used to love playing with really cocky, like super I'm the man kind of guys because they have this belief that if they fold, they lose, right? And if they fold, they're not going to fold. They will not put their hand down to lose. So really what they don't understand is at the end of this hand,
short-sightedness.
They lost before they ever started. Now it's just a matter of how much money can I cause them to put in the middle of the pot before they figure out they lost. And if they were smart, they'd have folded before they ever got, but they're like, oh, I'm already in it. Yeah. And I loved it. Those were like my favorite people because you want to talk about a way to walk into it, like a $20 buy-in game. If I walked into a $20 buy-in game with 5 or 6 people and I walked out with $200 or $300, it was a good night. With one of those guys at the table, I was able to probably pull that to 5 or 6. Like I was able to probably make a week. This has been I was 19, right? I was probably able to make a week off of one of those idiots. Like I loved it because they wouldn't. They were like, I don't fold. I don't give up. Yeah. I don't. And sometimes I see the I don't give up. Like I love it because you get these motivational memes and stuff. I don't quit. I don't give up. I'm like, sometimes, like you said, you're not going to be an NFL player if you were pursuing that as hard as someone and it's just not there. Yeah. I actually sometimes wonder, would you see people on like these singing shows that are terrible, right? Yeah. I'm like, did you not have a single friend in your life that would actually tell you the truth? Like not one.
I know.
Not one person is like, hey, that's probably not like, that's where I kind of sometimes I'm like, you can also fold. Like you are not stuck on a path. No one's stuck. People act like they're stuck in a bad relationship or they're stuck in a bad job. No, actually you're not.
Yeah.
Like it might be uncomfortable, it might suck, but you can totally quit.
But see, going to that story about the poker, there's luck of the cards. But then you had a strategy.
Oh yeah.
You had a plan. You're working that plan. So people are complicated. Life is complicated. You have the hands that you're dealt. You have to choose when to quit and when to play. Luck is involved. I mean, there's a lot involved there. But I guess my encouragement to people listening and stuff would be, whatever situation, you have to continue to try to move forward to something that's better. It might not be Jeff Bezos better. It might be the best that you can get out of yourself. In whatever that is, I think that's where we, as humans, we take the lid off the possibilities and discover what you can actually do. Because I see a lot of people sort of, especially now, again, to be the old man, I think in our culture now, people just complain about the adversity that's on them. Well, if I wouldn't have been born in the South, and if I wouldn't have been, it can be race, gender, color, geographical location, you name it. And people will take it as a disadvantage, or you can look at those advantages and say, man, I was born in the United States. I was, had good parents. And you can look at the things that people would consider as good, good chips to be dealt, and then run with those things, and turn those adversities into a positive.
You can, and I will say some of those adversities are more relevant than others, which I'm not going to get into a huge detail now. Like,
right.
Because the thing about geographical location, for example. All right, so you might not make $400,000 in the Southeast. You also don't have to, because let's be honest, like
that's right.
It's the Southeast. If you're pulling 175 to 200, you will never know the difference.
Right.
However, if you were in San Diego,
Yeah.
San Francisco,
You're poor.
pulling $200,000, like you would be feeling like make it. It's very different.
Sure.
And that's where the relevance comes in on that. But there's also some things that, there are some things. For example, we do tend to, and I'm not getting super political on this, but no, like race does matter, and it shouldn't. We would love to live in a world where we think it doesn't. It does. Gender shouldn't matter. It does. It does hold people back sometimes. But the thing is, maybe you weren't lucky enough to have been born on second base. You have to start from home plate and work your way around. And that sucks. You have to work a little harder. And that does suck. And it's not fair. Doesn't mean it can't happen.
Right.
And that's kind of my thing on that is, like you said, it's dealing the hinge. Maybe your cards do suck a little more. You're going to have to play a little more strategic. You're going to have to be a lot more attentive to the table. Like, you got dealt a pair of aces. Yeah. You might luck out. You might win. Although, even with good hands. You can lose
with the aces.
Well, not only that, but here's the problem with good hands. There's actually, I would say, this is why I like poker for this. Even good hands, people get lazy with good hands. Mm-hmm. Here's what I mean. I've got a pair of aces. Oh, look, an ace came down on the flop. Like, I've got this. And you probably do. Statistically, about a 95% chance that no one can touch that hand, right? So you start throwing money in, you don't hold it to yourself very well. You just let everyone in the world know. You start throwing money and people fold. Congratulations. You got people's like $2 annies. You didn't pull anyone in because you didn't play it.
That's right.
You didn't play it in a way to keep someone in the hand. You didn't value bet. You didn't try to do that. And that kind of the whole strategy of like, I'll check, you bet, now I raise you to force you to think, do you want to stay in this or not? Yeah. There's none of that strategy. Instead, I just threw it all out there and took what little bit I can get, and I'm happy with it because I won. Mm-hmm. And that's the danger sometimes in winning. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. You can actually win losing, and you can lose winning in a situation like that because you didn't win as much as you could have. Because really, with that kind of hand, that kind of flop, you might have been able to pull two people all the way through. Yeah. And in that process, you probably could have made off of like that little $2 ante, you probably could have pulled yourself, let's say it was a $20 game, you probably could have pulled yourself a couple $100 on that hand. Yeah. If you played it right. If you played it wrong, you made $20. Good job.
And again, I think the moral of the story is in the hand, work hard every day.
Yes.
Take things as they come, deal with them as they come, and try to conquer those little battles, but all the while have that long-term target,
Well, it's about
strategy.
I think the whole point is about intent. Like what we're talking about is intent. Like intentionality. Like if you got dealt crappy hands, you need to be intentional. Maybe you can bluff, maybe you can't. If you got dealt good hands, you need to be intentional. Because the thing is, where people mess up, and there's a great book, Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. Like the whole point of a big part of the book is like when adversity is usually when you start to look around. You've been driving down the same road this whole time and haven't been paying attention. Now all of a sudden you have to because something's wrong. That's kind of his whole point on that, and that's how it is. That's why I do like the poker analogy for life, because like you might get dealt terrible hands.
Yeah.
Maybe you were born in a terrible neighborhood. Maybe your family life sucks. Maybe you're in a place where racism's rampant. Whatever. Then you got to play the hand a lot better, and it sucks. It's not fair, but it can still be done. Or maybe you're so lucky you don't even know you're lucky, and you're just playing a really good hand stupidly. People do that too. It's all about knowing where you're at and playing intent. And that's why a lot of my hobbies and stuff we were talking about before, even down to like the shaving, because we didn't even get it at like the old school wet shaving. And there's a reason I do it. And the coffee, why I grind my own coffee and like buy like fresh coffee, is it's taking something that I do every day and putting intent on it.
Yeah.
Because like, yeah, I could shave. I could just buzz with an electric razor, whatever. It's a better shave. And it's also relaxing to me to use the soap, the brush, the old school little razor and stuff. It takes some actual thought in the morning and some actual intention. Same with the coffee, doing a pour over where you're actually taking the kettle and you're pouring the water and all that stuff. These are all things that take intent.
Yeah.
And with intent, it tends to put my mind like, no, this is what I'm doing. Like, this is me. This is what I'm doing. Same thing with work. Whenever I found myself not doing that well in business, I'm probably drifting. And sometimes it's because I can. Sometimes I've had some of the best months I've ever had in my life, and I'm like, I'm good. I do have 3 months worth of income in the bank. I don't have to do a thing. Yeah. That's playing the aces poorly. Yeah. And then sometimes I've been distracted by like bad life situations. A spouse going through depression, for example, because as the earlier story, that happens. Things like that. And I'm distracted and I'm not playing even any kind of hands. Like I'm just kind of folding every time because I'm running out of patience, right? Those are the situations where I find myself probably failing. And you can even tell in a regular conversation probably which one I'm at. Like if I'm in like the intentional phase or the non-intentional phase. Yeah. So I guess the whole point behind all of that is just intent. Intent is the key. Like even with the finances, any of the advice could be good advice, to be honest. Any of it could be terrible advice. Yeah. It's actually all intent. Well, it takes mental energy to be intentional. You have to think about, I want to be intentional. Right. And, I think that that's really good. Like taking a minute and pouring a cup of coffee is good for your mind. You know, I've thought a lot about even the way we eat now. We're looking at screens, we're eating, we're drinking our coffee while we're reading something on we got the TV going in the background. There's a lot of distractions, but we do need to, in anything, whether it's finance, whether it's just becoming a better person, we need to focus and try to make things better. Because I think the danger that's sort of taught to people nowadays is that everybody kind of makes the joke about everybody gets a trophy, like which I've actually never been anywhere where everyone gets a trophy. I hear this all the time. I've never actually witnessed in my life. I've been in those. I was given a trophy, but there was a better trophy. It's like these are the participation trophies, right? But it's the idea that hey, life's not fair, but it should be. It's not supposed to be fair. It's not going to be fair. And that's what I think any particular multilateral analysis of life is going to show multiple good cards and bad cards. You're going to have things that might work out for you, they might not. And the point is that people need to get it in their head that life is not fair and that no matter what the circumstance, you have to be intentional to try to work your way out of it. There are things like I would say, I mean, God forbid, but going through deaths in the family, you can't focus, Oh no, or even good things with my buddy and neighbor Michael down the street who just had a child. Like it's a fantastic distraction, but it's a distraction. Yeah, you can't do your best work when you've got a screaming baby that you're holding and you just want to stare at for an hour. Like you can't fully focus. So, but you have to ride those waves and you have to educate yourself on what's a good
education to get? What's a good field to go into? Where do I live? Like paying attention to those things, because you're totally right. Like if you live in Arizona, starting a lawn care business might not be the thing. Here, maybe it's a little bit better. So, doing the thing, reading the books, it takes intention to get a book and read about a subject that you're interested in or that you might be scared of or whatever. So I think intention's a good word. I like to use that word a lot, and I'm glad you brought it up, because for me, I like to do these podcasts because I enjoy people, but it's a challenge for me as well to, first off, get the podcast recorded, get through it, do the work, share it. It's a lot of work for me to do that, but it helps me selfishly to have good conversation. I always believe in iron sharpens iron.
Oh, yeah.
People talking to people, having deep conversations over a cup of coffee is going to do way more than posting something on Facebook and blasting everybody
all day.
So I just encourage, anybody, get out there, have a conversation, reach out to me. I mean, I intend on continuing doing podcasts and opening up, having people come on, asking questions and encouraging them. I was excited to have you on again. I know we can't talk about finance a lot, but I think that in the wheel of life, finance is a whole spoke on the wheel.
It is.
That needs to be focused on.
And it's one that people don't. And here's the thing. It's easy. Well, it's not easy not to. I shouldn't say it like that. But it's one of those things where people kind of can't. Like, they won't because they don't know. It's sort of like when there's a noise on my car, I'm going to probably want to ignore it because I'm not a mechanic, right? I'm just going to ignore the noise. But the problem is, if I had someone look at it early, it could have been cheap.
Yeah.
If you wait too long, it's not cheap. It's not easy.
Well,
it's too late to fix it. Because like you mentioned, that's one that chart's been out so long, it's fine. It assumes a lot of things like averages and stuff. But if you start investing at 25 versus 35, you end up spending 30% less money, and you're done 10 years sooner. Like, yeah, that's a pretty well proven thing. Like, time is everyone's friend, because you don't even have to. Yeah. I actually read a statistic too that a lot of people who are millionaires, there's almost a third of millionaires never made over a six-figure income. Yeah. And it all came
I know a few of those people.
It came from building assets, because they put more, instead of spending, they invested, which is an easy thing to do for some people. Now, some people psychologically, they live to live. I kind of fall in the middle. Like, yeah, I like things. I like nice coffee. I like nice whiskey. We were talking about that before things. I like whips, nicer stuff. I like whips. Watches. Whips, watches, whiskey.
Shaving.
Wet shaving. We'll go wet shaving. Keep the alliteration, right? Yeah. Keep the alliteration. I don't really know how to make coffee with a W though. But anyway.
Watered down coffee.
Well, no. Actually, you don't want that. That's bad. Yeah. But no, it is about finding that balance for people though, because you should probably treat yourself. Like, I'm not a fan of and again, it's the asterisk on this is it depends on your situation.
Yep.
I don't think that you should live like you're dirt poor every day, because like the whole don't see the inside of a restaurant unless you work there kind of thing, because you're trying to get out of debt, which I can commend someone for doing.
Sure.
It's like starving yourself in a diet though. Like, I promise you're eventually going to fail. Whereas sometimes for me, getting into nicer places, going to places that were a little out of my range probably helped me. Joining organizations, looking at stuff, because I realized I'm not much different than anyone else there. No. Not at all. And I just as well fit in as anyone else sitting there.
Well, going back to the luck thing just for a second, like in any job, you have, at some point in your life, you have to be given a chance to do something that you've never done before. And some employer has to say, this person's got the aptitude. But you have to show you have the aptitude to get the chance.
Oh, and I actually, you're not wrong, because I remember very specifically, like my resume had Blue Ridge Community College at the bottom of it, and it did not have anything else. There wasn't a degree. And I remember some HR people having much more people skills than other ones be like, I think you left off the last part of your resume. Oh, no, I didn't leave it off. It's just not there, but thank you. Seems like you left off the education part of your resume. Oh, I didn't leave it off. It just doesn't exist. But let me tell, and that sucked. I vividly remember I was actually talking to, and this is where luck and also just knowing people comes in. I was talking to a friend of mine who's trying to change jobs. Like, he's looking for a bunch of different stuff in the IT world, right? And Timing does kind of suck because he just got back from being overseas serving, like he's in the military, and pandemic hit, and a lot of IT jobs in the banks are currently on freeze, which was kind of the plan, and now it's not working out. But we were talking, and I was trying to give him some advice, but I realized I don't actually have that much advice on how to apply for a job because it dawned on me that I haven't actually applied, like literally applied for a job since 2011 is the last time I actually remember. Well, no. There was a time when I was there. 2013 is the last time I remember actually putting in a job application because I found the job here in Charlotte. I stayed there for several years. The next job I found was because a friend of a friend was looking for someone like me, and we got introduced. Then the next career shift I made after that was going into finance, which into the financial world. There's a lot of places, bigger firms will hire people just to train them.
Yeah.
They'll hire 100 people and hope 10 work out. So I kind of got into that situation just by having some conversations with some people over coffee. I don't remember the last time I went through a formal application process. And that's where you're talking about luck, because here's the thing. I also don't remember the last time that anyone asked my education on a resume. Ever, because there comes a point when you have enough work history and you get old enough that no one really depending on what field you're going into, that people don't really care as much.
Yeah.
Like I know someone who is over the entire app development department of a pretty big bank here in Charlotte who didn't finish their degree. But he got through enough work. He worked at a bunch of different places enough that no one cares. No one's even asking.
Well, yeah. Going back to the digital stuff that we keep talking about, you send your resume into this abyss, and some computer filters you out because you don't have a degree, you don't have a master's, you don't whatever. You just immediately get kicked out. The number one thing still for getting a job is knowing somebody, and statistically, the most effective way is not a friend, but a friend of a friend, like one removed, because there's still that trust. Because I know when I hire, I don't just immediately go to Indeed and post and just hope.
Right.
Because I literally get hundreds of resumes. And as an intake person, it's daunting because you're like, I'm getting, the guy that has worked 6 months at Bojangles applying for a systems engineer job. Maybe he's going to be the best guy in the world, but his resume doesn't show it.
And you don't know.
I don't know him.
Time to go through
and I'm not going to go through because he's one of literally 300-400 people that apply, and they're just they're just throwing the resumes on any job out there, hoping. Again, I would encourage anybody looking for a job, network, talk to people, show them your personality, because at the end of the day, I tend to hire for personality first, and skill later. Because even with all the technology, networking and personal interaction is king. And I think that's not to get on a huge tangent about the coronavirus, but that's what I think really we're suffering through right now is lack of interaction, lack of people, lack of things to look forward to. And so for those people that are going to be looking for jobs, which I know right now they are, talk to people, hone your skills, read books, get out there and do something. Start a business. Entrepreneurship is down. I'm part of a group called 1 Million Cups that you've been to as well. Entrepreneurship is down. A lot of people shifted into the corporate world, and now they're waking up saying, wow, this is not necessarily fulfilling. And to some, it's fine. So I think there's going to be a shift back to entrepreneurs.
Probably.
There already is, being an entrepreneur is cool right now, but it's a different kind of cool. It's there's a lot of people that are just turning and burning, like create an app, sell it, start something else,
There's also, there's so much. Okay. First off, there's entrepreneurs who have entrepreneur as their tag on LinkedIn with the strong arm emoji. They're not entrepreneurs. I don't know what they are. Entrepreneurs. I don't know. Whatever on that.
Yeah.
But there are. Oh man, this is gonna be. There's like business coaches and stuff, which I'm not gonna go to. We've talked about this.
Yeah.
You know how I feel. Like it's kind of that's a interesting field to me because some of them have never owned a business, and I'm like, I don't know that I would trust your advice for anything. But then there's also there's studies done that apparently like millennials are supposed to be one of the most entrepreneurial generations ever, right? Statistically, when asked, would you start a business? The answer is like anonymous, like almost resounding yes. Not almost, not resounding, but I mean, we're talking higher than previous generations. We're talking 30-40%, right?
Yeah.
Say yes, which is almost half.
Hmm.
But as you pointed out, business ownership as a whole is actually down.
Yeah.
So what happened? 40% or more say they want to, but then it's down to less than, like, we're actually getting into like under 20% as far as
I think
people
it's
starting
in the
them.
teens. Yeah.
Yeah. So like there's a big gap there. And part of it I think is actually being shown right now. And this is a weird thing. You have a very risk averse generation because they graduated during a recession. This is about playing those cards because they remember touching a hot stove. They'll never touch it again.
Yeah. That's
even
very
though
true.
even though it's been 11 years since it's been like a real problem, right? Doesn't matter. It's been 11 years of growth through 2 different presidents, all kinds of different political situations and different environments, global situations. Doesn't matter. It's been 11 years of like almost straight growth. Not going to touch that stove. Not doing it. Can't fool me.
Yep.
That's happened. And now that the pandemic hit, because it's almost like we have 2 economies right now. You have a Wall Street and a Main Street economy. On a Wall Street economy, honestly, pandemic hasn't affected anything. We had some volatility because of some uncertainty. Hasn't mattered.
Yeah.
Because when you look at the companies that are pushing it forward, the Googles, the Apples, etc., they're doing better.
Yep.
Like you're stuck home, Amazon's doing great. Oh, you're stuck home, Google's doing.
Yeah.
There's more people. There's more eyes on more screens than there ever have been.
Yeah.
Ad revenues at an all-time high, right? So streaming services are doing fantastic. So the market's going up, even though, which looks like the economy's going up, but it's only one piece of it because on the other hand, I've had several clients go out of business. Some coffee shops. There's a really good coffee shop that was in Uptown that closed down because, and this is where it comes to luck, by the way. She had just bought it. She bought it from the previous owner. She had just taken out the loan halfway through 2019. She'd only had about 6 months worth of proper like owning a business before about 8. And this happened. And it's one of those things, oh, well, she should have had the cash flow. She should have had this. Wasn't on her business plan when she bought this business.
Right.
And she bought it it was pure timing. It's that is tantamount to getting a pair of aces and then the entire pool of cards that goes in the middle are all low cards and someone has a straight. You have a pair of aces and someone has a 2 through 6 straight and you just lost on a stupid hand. Yeah. Statistically, you shouldn't have.
Sure.
And that's what we're seeing right now. And I think that's where some of the fear of entrepreneurship comes from because it's changing. Because like, look, I know people who got furloughed, got laid off. They did great. Yeah. $600, $700 a week coming in on unemployment. I'm not trying to like bash that either. Like good for them. It's there for them. Yeah. They went right back to work, got off the unemployment. It's like it never happened. I know people who own smaller businesses though without big staff, so they couldn't get like the small business loans that were coming out. They're done. It's over. It cost them more to bring people back, so they had to lose their staff. Like there's a lot of stuff. The rules of the game are different for different people, and I think some people are starting to feel it, if that makes sense. And that's where some of that fear comes in because it is a matter of how do you start a business. And also, as we alluded to earlier, real estate's high right now. Stocks are high. Like everything's kind of high. Yeah. I think you'll see a resurgence of stuff when things go down because like sometimes a recession's a great time to start a business because you don't have a lot of other options and everything's cheap.
It's funny because I know yourself included. I know several people who have made jumps, started businesses. Sometimes it wasn't their choice. There've been, and there's still layoffs happening, and I think we're still going to see some more. But depending again, that hand, sometimes you got to fold and say, well, that didn't work out, but I'm still old enough. I'm gonna try something. And you said something really nice earlier where you were saying, like, if you look, when I asked you about making those risk calculations, if you look at how bad it could be, there's some folks out there that say, you know what if I try something for 2 years and it doesn't work out? Well, I'll just go back. I've still got my credentials. I've still got that resume. And maybe in 2 years, the economy will be back and go back to big corporate and get another job. Try something, be an entrepreneur for a little while and just see how it works out.
That's actually kind of what I did. I remember talking to my wife about it and I was like, I don't know. It's kind of a risk. And she basically said, listen, You have, because I had done some MLM stuff, which is the whole, whatever.
Oh,
Never doing that.
I'm embarrassed of you.
I know. I was too, especially some of the things I said to some people at the time. Like, oh my gosh. Like, yeah, because you're like, oh man, I love having smart people. I'm like, man, if you knew,
Yeah.
that's smart's relative. Okay.
Yeah.
But no, like, I've done the YouTube and stuff like that. I've done some like part-time business. My wife's like, you have tried part-time like entrepreneurship so many times.
Yeah.
She's like, just roll the dice. Like, she's like, it's something you've always talked about doing. You've wanted to be independent forever.
Yeah.
Why would you not? She's like, because here's the thing. If it doesn't work out, you go back to work. It's fine. At least you know. If you don't do it, you're going to be mad. She's like, I know you well enough to know you'll be pissed off and you'll be thinking about it like 3 years from now.
Man.
And she was right. And here's the thing. And that was a calculation. I left on good terms. I could call back probably all 3 of my previous employers tomorrow and have a job, right?
Yeah.
Like, I left on good terms. Some of them became clients. Like, I'm in really good contact with a lot of people.
Sure.
And through like what I do, I know a ton of people. Like, I'm not really that concerned on that, right? And she was right. Like, it was one of those things. I would have probably hated myself had I not tried.
Yeah.
And that's when you know you should do something, because sometimes it's not. I have a friend who is a starter. This dude has started a clothing website. He started a blog. He started a YouTube channel. He started so many things he's never finished.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think he's the kind of person that would benefit from just burning the boats. Like, the whole burn the ships, like we leave on the enemy ships thing.
Yeah.
He would totally benefit from doing that. Some people, that's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
There's some people that's a great idea. That's, again, it's the whole intent and hand you're dealt.
So, so what's next for you? What's your next couple of years look like? What's your strategy, your plan?
That's actually a really good question. No, I'm building out my practice. I just switched firms. I just switched to something more boutique, more independent with Strategic Planning Group. And my plan is to, honestly, I'm going to do a couple things. And this is where it's going to get a little crazy. And speaking of intent, I'm going to have to be intentional with like everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good thing we did this podcast now, because it's going to probably get harder. I'm going to build out my business with existing clients plus some new ones. And I'm trying to transition to where I'm not like actively out. It's a lot more referral basis, stuff like that. But I'm also going to be working on my licensure and getting some designations, because I've finally been in business long enough to get some, because you have to be in practice for so long and like so many hours or whatever to get some of the designations. And it's something I want. It's some professional designations. It's almost like a year-long college course, essentially, for these designations. And that's coming up probably in the next year or so too. So there's going to be a huge education, which the nice thing is, when you look at the as you alluded to earlier, the spokes, I don't know if you've ever done the balance wheel. It sounds like you probably have.
Yeah.
On the wheel of balance, the growth, the career, those kind of things are going to sort of take care of themselves with that type of plan. And I already know going in, I'm going to have to be super intentional on family time, friends, stuff like that, because I don't want to have a bunch of clients and a bunch of designations and a wife who's kind of a stranger. That sounds like a loss, not a win.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to have to like really try to focus there. But that's what the next few years look like for me. Cool. Child's about to go to school, although that looks different. That looks different than it used to, because he was supposed to go to preschool this year, but we were like, no, let's not do that.
Yeah. Interesting year, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on, and I wish you the best, man. I look forward to seeing how that intent pays off, and
absolutely,
we'll have you come back and talk about progress if you can. So
at some point, I'm sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Dalton Stephenson, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for coming on, man. Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Chad. Have a good one. You bet.